Thank you very much for joining us for Next Up. This is where we interview community leaders about issues of the day, and I can't think of one topic that's more of the issue of the day than abortion. Last week, as you know, the Supreme Court said there's no constitutional right to an abortion, and almost immediately Missouri outlawed all abortions except for those involving a medical emergency. And so for this edition, we would like to welcome Mallory Schwarz from Pro-Choice Missouri. She's the executive director there, and Sam Lee from Campaign Life Missouri. And thank you, Sam. Thank you, Mallory, for joining Ray and me on Next Up.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Well, the title of our show is Next Up, so I want to address something to both of you in whatever order you want, and that is, what is next up in your view for your, Sam, of course, you write a lot of legislation for Missouri, and Mallory, you're very involved in the pro-choice movement. In each of your cases, what's next for you? What's the next step?
You know, I think for us, for Pro-Choice Missouri, there is not abortion left to protect in the state, and so we are looking ahead to how we rebuild liberated, equitable access to abortion for our state. Roe v. Wade was never enough. It left so many people behind, the people most harmed by the bills that Mr. Lee passes here: Black people, people of color, people surviving paycheck to paycheck, folks with disabilities, young people, our rural communities, and LGBTQ folks have all been left behind by Roe, and so now we have an opportunity to build a more equitable future. That's a long game, but we're here for the long haul.
For us, we want to enforce the laws that are already in effect, and one of those is a law that we actually passed in 1986, which prohibits the use of public funds for performing or assisting an abortion. And the city of St. Louis County, and Kansas City are all considering legislation, ordinances, resolutions, whatever, that would use public funds not to pay for the abortion itself, but to pay for other things that assist in that abortion. And that's prohibited by state law. And the remedy for that is for one of two things: a taxpayer to file suit in circuit court, or the Attorney General of Missouri also has jurisdiction to enforce those laws. So basically enforce the laws we have now, and then we'll look to the future in January what we need to do.
What if the city of St. Louis reimburses the child care for a woman who crosses from the city of St. Louis to Fairview Heights to get an abortion using federal dollars? Would that actually be against the law? Under state statute, federal dollars that are in possession of the city of St. Louis, it could be any source of funding, as long as the city of St. Louis has possession of that, those are considered public funds by definition. So if it is being used to assist an abortion, whether we're talking about child care, transportation, hotel rooms, whatever it might be.
That's Sam's own interpretation of what assist means. If I told you that I needed a bus pass to get to my mammogram, would that be assisting in the provider in providing that care? I don't think so. What we're looking at is poverty being an aggressive barrier to people being able to access healthcare appointments. And so whether they need transportation, an Uber, a train, childcare, or a hotel, that is not related to the procedure itself, which is what our law talks about in aid and assist.
Well, the courts of Missouri or the federal courts will decide that if and when there's a lawsuit filed.
I was wondering, in the first half of the show, is abortion de facto legal in St. Louis County now if the county prosecutor refuses to prosecute any abortion cases?
Well, it's interesting. Under Missouri law, and Missouri may be unique among all the states, the Attorney General of Missouri has original concurrent jurisdiction to prosecute any abortion-related offense, to enforce the laws on public funding of abortion, anything in Chapter 188, which is the abortion chapter. So regardless of whether the Wesley Bell decides to prosecute or not, the Attorney General would have the authority to prosecute or seek injunctive relief. And so I would expect that would happen if necessary, but that's if someone attempts to violate the law.
Okay, should the Attorney General of the state of Missouri investigate miscarriages?
No.
Why not?
Why would he? Those aren't abortions.
Well, you don't know. And you don't know if somebody says they had a miscarriage, how do you know that it wasn't an illegal abortion?
Well, I mean, there'd have to be evidence. There'd have to be somebody coming forth to present that. I mean, I don't expect someone going into a hospital or a doctor's office to treat a miscarriage as something that would be covered by the law.
We've already seen that happen, though, in Texas, where people are investigated for miscarriage or other pregnancy outcomes because it is, to the eye, not differential, not different from what an abortion would look like. A miscarriage is a spontaneous abortion. And so you can say that that's the intent of the law, but that's not what the impact is going to be. And the impact is that people are going to be criminalized. And we are already seeing that across the country and have for more than 5-10 years. People have been and are still in prison for their pregnancy outcomes.
No woman in Missouri is criminalized for having an abortion. Our law is specifically written so that any criminal penalty or civil or administrative penalty is only against the person who performs or induces an abortion on another. That's not only the current law now, that's been the law since 1825 when Missouri passed its
What
first
about this
law.
controversial conspiracy language, which says that the woman involved in a conspiracy could be prosecuted, correct?
Well, actually the law says she can't be prosecuted for a conspiracy. So there's...
That's correct.
Right,
So
yeah.
if you take away conspiracy, some people are interpreting that as saying, okay, it wasn't conspiracy, it was actually getting an abortion.
Right. I mean, the law is clear. It's someone who performs or induces it on another. So a woman is perfectly free to get an abortion without any sort of concern about criminal penalties. She can buy abortion pills on the internet. Now, if someone else purchases those for her and provides those to her, let's say her boyfriend, okay, or let's say somebody who she's in an abusive situation and her boyfriend buys something from India and forces her to take it, he could be prosecuted, but not the woman herself.
Well, as you know, some states, and I can't imagine Missouri won't become one of them, want to prohibit women from going across state lines to have an abortion. Do you see that as something that Missouri should be looking at?
I mean, Missouri was the first state to introduce that legislation, that cross-state ban. We were the first ones. I'm sure you had a hand in it. And that's as well as a medication abortion ban, which, as you just said, if the person is purchasing and self-administering and self-managing their abortion at home, they are their provider. And so you can say that you don't want the woman prosecuted, but the impact is going to be criminalization.
The law doesn't allow that, so I don't know how you can say that. To answer your question about that, I'm on record in testifying and speaking against any sort of private cause of action, a Texas-style law, where people can just, random people, could file suit and try to prevent someone from crossing state lines or having an abortion. I don't think that's the way we should go here in Missouri. I know they've done that in Texas. I know they've done that in 1 or 2 other states. I just think that's the wrong way to go.
What are your two understandings of the so-called morning after pill, which in some cases can prevent fertilized egg from attaching itself to the womb? St. Luke's Hospital apparently in Kansas City had some confusion about that. They weren't sure if that contraceptive is now legal or not.
So emergency contraception, Plan B, or the morning after pill is contraception. It's a preventive method of birth control, like birth control pills or IUDs or other methods. And I think we saw a lot of back and forth this week, but ultimately had both the governor and the AG state that contraception, including emergency contraception, wouldn't be included under the trigger law, which we also then saw St. Luke's reverse their position. And so I think that's positive, but the harm, frankly, has already been done because at Pro-Choice Missouri, our inboxes and DMs and voicemails have been flooded all week by people, particularly young people, who are terrified about what this means for their access. And that's a great example of how whatever the law is, the cultural impact, the impact on providers and on patients, on people, is so much greater. And there is a chilling effect that we are already seeing and are going to continue to see, preventing people from being able to get access to the reproductive health care they need, starting with abortions, but then looking at birth control and going beyond.
We agree. Plan B, the morning after pill, is not an abortion pill. It's not covered under the abortion law. I've said that publicly, and I know that the Attorney General and the Governor have made that clear. It was never included. And
what if life begins at conception, though? Doesn't the law state that it does?
But I mean, I can read the actual definition, but it requires the intent to destroy a embryo or fetus in his or her mother's womb, or an intent to terminate a pregnancy, and you can't intend to do something which you don't even know if you're pregnant or not. So it's never been covered by the law. If morning after pills were covered by the law, and that's a definition that's the same before and after the Supreme Court Dobbs decision. So if morning after pills were a method of inducing abortion, then every Walgreens and CVS that sells morning after pills would have to be licensed as an abortion facility, which of course they weren't. It's an absurd argument. And it's unfortunate it's people like Claire McCaskill, who's been on TV and social media and others, who've been promoting this myth for whatever reason. And I know that the pro-choice people have been unhappy with those who've been doing that.
Throughout this debate over decades, religious freedom has been invoked by your side often. So there have been issues, should Catholic hospitals have to do abortion? Should people have to prescribe the morning after pill that don't believe in it? And that's been a common refrain. And I've actually been sympathetic in some cases to that argument. I happen to be Jewish, okay? I ain't a model Jew by any means. But why should women of my faith be governed by a principle, whatever you put in there about life beginning at conception, that the Jewish faith actively disagrees with, and I'm talking about Reform and conservative Jews, actively disagrees with the definition of life. In Judaism, whether you go to the Talmud, whether you go to the other sacred texts, life begins at birth, okay? That's the view. It's not a cult. And by the way, there's other religions, whether the Islamic faith and Buddhism and others, that have different views than the Catholic Church, for example. Why should our government establish that one faith's view of this should prevail?
The legislature in 1986 made a legislative finding that the life of each individual human being begins at conception. That was part of the law, and that was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1989. And the legislature looked into the scientific and biological evidence. The life of an individual human being begins at conception. Now, the value that we place on that life...
That's not based in science at all.
Well, of course it is. You know, ask biologists, when does an individual human life begin?
What do you say to women of my faith who disagree with that legislative panel? I mean, great, some legislative panels is the size. What do you say to real-life women whose faith tells them that they are being governed by a premise that, respectfully, they disagree with, religiously, spiritually, and we don't even get into people with different, the independent spirituality. I'm talking about, what do you say? I get that you've got this process you've gone through. My question is, what do you say today to a woman who says, you're telling me I've got to be governed by the Catholic Church's view? What's to keep the Catholic Church from declaring that Jesus died for our sins? That will be part of our legislation too. I mean, explain that.
What I can say is that the law has to apply to everyone equally. And in this case, Missouri's law that provides that this finding that human life begins in conception and that unborn children are to be protected in the law has to apply equally to all Missourians. So I mean, that's the best answer I can give.
So
I know you disagree with it.
No, there's no answer to people. You're saying basically that our non-sectarian government is going to give preference to one faith over another in definitions that they don't agree. And again, it's not just Judaism. There's a lot of people of faith and people who are atheists and agnostics who have as much right as anybody else that don't wish to be governed. And no one's saying, by the way, that people of those faiths should not be entitled to their view. In other words, Catholics and Baptists and others who believe that, by all means, should be protected by the government under the First Amendment to practice their faith as they see fit. That's why I'm sympathetic to people who say, I don't want to have to perform an abortion if I'm a Catholic. That's fine, I get that. But I don't understand why there's no respect for other faiths where you say, well, this is science, this is fact. It isn't science, it is not fact.
You and I just disagree on, on that. So.
Well, let me ask you, is it possible, Mallory Schwarz, at your organization, for a doctor who might be based in St. Louis to have a teleconference with a woman in St. Louis City or St. Louis County and direct them to go to the Fairview Heights abortion clinic?
So I think it depends on kind of what you're saying. If you're saying, can someone call and get a recommendation that there is abortion available in another state? absolutely. If it's a question of a telemedicine prescription, no, Missouri law already prevents that, despite the FDA saying medication abortion is safe to access by mail and should be available like that. So I think that, yes, we are telling people every day that they can call our partners, our clinics, Fairview Heights or Hope Clinic in Granite City, and get access to abortion and make their appointments there.
But if a woman has an appointment with an attending physician, a doctor, can the doctor say, hey, I've taken a look at your situation, here are your options, one of them is in Fairview Heights?
There's nothing in the law that prohibits that physician from telling her to go across state line to have an abortion. What the law prohibits, or what the law requires, is if you're going to take an abortion pill, the physician has to do it in person, and at least the first dose has to be given to the woman. Of course, we know that it's a 2-dose regimen, and she can take that second dose at home. In Missouri, that would only be allowed if it's the case of a medical emergency. If it's not that case, that physician cannot do that in Missouri. But he or she is free to refer her to Illinois, Kansas, or anywhere else.
But wouldn't that be assisting her? Just like a child care worker might be assisting the woman if she helps the woman out with the parenting while the woman heads over to Fairview Heights?
Well, we're talking about two different things here. One is referring someone to Illinois for an abortion. The other is using public funds to assist an abortion, which is prohibited under law.
Is that clear to you?
That's not clear to me at all, that offering someone child care is more of an assist than providing a phone referral, which is legal. They're both perfectly legal. And again, what we are trying to do is ensure that poverty is not a barrier to accessing basic health care. I know I'm going back, but I would also love to address the idea that a law written in 1887, or whatever the year was that you said, is based in science, as if we haven't had progression in science and medicine since then, and even from 1973 when the Roe decision first came down. The words that you're talking about that are in our state statute, conception, unborn child, these are not medical terms. They are not based in science. They are based in ideology. They are religious-based and ideological, and it is exactly what Ray said, in putting your personal beliefs on other people. And even beyond that, Catholic women, Catholic people with the capacity for pregnancy use and access abortions as much as any other religious group. And 99% of people who are Catholic and might face an unintended pregnancy have used birth control in their lifetime. These are services that apply and are needed by everybody across religions. And so there is not uniformity in this belief.
And I have to get back to this. Okay, so we've established that you have disagreement with women of my faith about their right to practice their faith in this case, basically. I guess, first of all, should this not, if you're intellectually honest, I don't really understand why you say, well, we would never prosecute women. A woman is the person, if you assume that the taking of a zygote's life, a fetus's life, is a murder, you've got a woman who comes up with the idea for this crime, again, your words, not mine, who plans it, who hires the hitman. And you're telling me that she is somehow to be viewed as a victim, you know, which is the ultimate patronizing view of women, if there ever was one. How is it that you can sit there and say this is a murder, but that the person who arranges, plans for it, and pays for it is no, we would never prosecute her? That seems awfully expedient as opposed to principle.
And it's because they know how it will look. They know that it will look bad.
It's the tradition in Missouri.
The tradition.
Let me finish, please, okay?
Sure.
Since 1825, up until today, certainly up until 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, that the only person who was prosecuted was the person who performed or induced an abortion on another. And when the legislature passed this bill in 2019, they continued that tradition that women are not prosecuted. I don't have a problem with that. I think that's perfectly fine, and I think that's what every state in the union That's been the policy. It was the policy before Roe versus Wade, and it's the policy today.
Is there not a responsibility to have some logic to it? I mean, in other words, if it's a murder, how do you justify? And again, I don't want you to prosecute women, I understand. But the point is, I don't understand the illogic of saying this is a murder, which I don't think it is, by the way. I don't think at 8 weeks, when a fetus is the size of a fruit, I don't think that's a murder. But the point is, you do, and yet you're saying, well, you know, but we've never done this, and it seems very expedient as opposed to principle. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Well, among other things, I was wondering, is it actually the law that a victim of incest or rape cannot have an abortion in the state of Missouri?
It is the law. I think what's really important to know about that is when HB 126 passed in 2019, without the rape and incest exceptions, there was outrage even from folks on Mr. Lee's side of the aisle. And it shows how unpopular that is. But I think what's really important about that is rape and incest exceptions, as they are, or exemptions, don't really protect anyone. They exist within Medicaid in the state, and there's one instance in the past 3 years or so, because they create such insurmountable hoops for a survivor to have to jump through that there is not really any way for them to access an abortion in the timely way that they need anyways. And so it's not practical in reality, but what we saw when that legislation passed and when that first was put forward without those exceptions was willingness to say the quiet part out loud, a willingness to say we don't actually care about the lives of survivors and of pregnant people. We actually just care about maintaining our power and control over other people's decision-making and bodies.
You know, when that bill passed in the House in 2019, no one offered an amendment, not a Republican, not a Democrat, offered an amendment in committee or on the House floor to add any additional exceptions, whether rape or incest or anything else. Same thing in the Senate. Nobody offered it, so it didn't get on. I don't know what would have happened if it had been offered and if there had been an up or down vote on it. So there are a lot of people complaining about it today, but they weren't willing to do it.
What do you think? Well, what do you think? I mean, again, I feel like and I want to ask
No,
you.
I want to ask.
Go ahead. You go ahead. Ask.
You're a 13 or 14-year-old girl, and
Right.
you're the victim of rape, and you're pregnant. Do you believe that girl should take the baby to term?
That's a horrible situation. Any sort of rape or sexual assault is horrible. But that unborn child is an innocent victim in all of this. That child was conceived. And if you hold to the pro-life position that a human life begins from conception onward, and that life should have the same value as any other life that is born, we can't hold any other moral position than that life should be protected as well, regardless of his or her circumstances of being conceived. Now, how that plays out in the law, that can be a different question. There are some states, that, a handful of states that have restricted abortion that do have rape and incest exceptions. We don't in Missouri, and again—
And it's only because no one offered an amendment.
Well, nobody did. And again, folks are complaining, but there were Democrats who offered amendments to that bill, but that wasn't one of them.
Can you explain that? Maybe, I don't know if you were with Pro-Choice Missouri at the time, Ms. Schwarz, but can you explain why nobody offered an amendment to that?
You know, I actually started in this role in June of 2019, so I was not there for those debates, but I think it goes to what I was saying, that those an amendment of that sort, those exemptions are meaningless in reality. We are already seeing the extent to which the current exemption is going to prove potentially meaningless, that you are asking physicians and to wait till the pregnant person is on their deathbed before qualifying that as a medical emergency. These exemptions are meaningless, and they're a way for folks like Mr. Lee and the other side to save face so that it doesn't appear that they're doing what they are clearly doing, which is just trying to control pregnant people and limit their decision-making and access to health care.
The medical emergency exception has been in the law for quite a while now, and no one has had a problem understanding what it means. And it applies to circumstances, let's say, a parental consent law. Our law right now is that a minor has to get the consent of one parent. If there's a medical emergency, then that law does not have to be followed. Same thing with the 72-hour waiting period and the informed consent law.
This
If there's
is
a
just
medical
a myopic
emergency,
view that we're already seeing a chilling effect on physicians. Like, that's I'm glad you're living up here, but the impact on the real world is people are being harmed, physicians are concerned, and people are going to be physically harmed.
And I have to say, as a father of a 16-year-old, if you're telling me the government, the federal or state government, is going to enforce childbirth on my little girl under any circumstances, my answer is, I've got a Second Amendment solution for you. Try to come into my house. Seriously, because you're basically arguing that the government should enforce the Christian faith's view on all women, who, whether they subscribe to it or not, in the name, to use your phrase, morality. And I can't think as a father of a less moral position than to tell me, an American, and my daughter, that government's going to enforce childbirth on, and if anybody's
Less than 45 seconds to go.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
The good thing is that there are over 75 pregnancy resource centers and close to 20 maternity homes who are willing to take any woman at any time,
Listen,
under any
I
circumstances.
don't even know how to address that in 45 seconds.
To help that.
Pregnancy resource centers, crisis pregnancy centers are anti-abortion fake clinics
at no cost whatsoever.
that try to coerce
Whenever she
and
might
manipulate
need,
people who try
homeless
to
pregnant
access
women
care.
can have a place
They
to stay.
coerce and manipulate people. They do not help healthcare providers.
It's a Donnybrook.
I'm afraid, we are out of time. Mallory, Schwarz, Sam Lee, thank you very much for joining Ray and me, and thanks everybody for joining us. We'll see you next week at this time. Have a great Independence Day.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.